Now, we know that social media in China has quite a lot of censorship built in, but Kerry Allen, China media analyst for BBC Monitoring, told me that people had been unusually frank there about these facial recognition projects.
They're very concerned, very, very concerned. It was hoped that this would be a beneficial move with this new AI technology that a lot of phones have now, a lot of apps. I mean, the government saw this as a means of making people's lives more convenient. But people don't see it like that. They're very concerned that if they walk into a shop and they're registering a new mobile phone, that their facial data is being taken. And they're worried that China is trying to be ahead of the times at the expense of ensuring that the security is correctly in place. If people are suddenly giving a lot of facial data that's tied into other things like your banking accounts, who knows what, if that could be exploited. So a lot of the comments I've been seeing on Sina Weibo, which is the equivalent of, say, Facebook or Twitter in China, is saying this is like Big Brother. I'm very concerned that people might be able to steal my facial data and find out where I live. It used to be the case that people might find out my phone number and I'd get crank calls. Nowadays, they might find out my face and find out everything about me.
What's interesting about this is that we've been hearing for the last 3 or 4 years about how far advanced China is in facial recognition and how widely it's used. Has this been the kind of final straw for people, or has there been anxiety all along amongst the general populace?
Well, people have been accepting that it's started to arrive in some industries. I mean, there's a bookshop that's very famous in China, known as the Xinhua chain of bookstores, and they decided to introduce facial recognition. They were one of the earliest companies that did this, and the idea was that you could just pay for a book by scanning your face. But the initial feedback that they got was that people didn't like seeing their face when they paid for things. So the bookstore actually introduced facial filters to make people feel more attractive when they were buying things. So there were concerns at that level that it wasn't a very civilized or sophisticated way of doing things. So there were a few concerns about the way it came into the country. I mean, China also kind of said that it would be introduced at certain points as a form of surveillance, so the idea was that it was keeping people safe. But now, I mean, there have been some controversies as well. For example, last month there was a park that introduced facial recognition as a mandatory requirement so that people entered the park, and a local professor was quite concerned that he was being asked suddenly to scan his face if he wanted to come and see the animals. So he was saying that people should have a choice in this matter. This is technology that's ahead of the times almost. A lot of Chinese people feel that they're not really ready for it yet. So there are concerns, yeah.
Now, this is all bound up with a Chinese government which has got a pretty broad system of surveillance and also a pretty effective way of controlling comment online. Are they going to allow people to dissent in this way?
Well, they are at the moment, yes. I mean, I would say the majority of opinion is that people are concerned about facial recognition because it enters so many different areas of society. There is facial recognition being introduced in schools, so that's got parents talking about their concerns. It's being introduced in public parks, so that's got people talking about the wider implications. It's got businesses talking at a level of whether this violates consumers' rights by being bought in. There's so many different industries that are talking about this, and the government can't really censor everybody on this topic. It can use what's known as the 50 Cent Party, who are people who are paid a small amount of money in line with the government's message to post messages in support of the technology. So I have seen a lot of those, for example, a lot of people saying that this is China moving forward and showing how fast it's developing. It's moving ahead of the US in this respect. But at the same time, a lot of people are anxious about this. I mean, it was only 3 years ago that it was common in China for people to be using QR codes to scan for absolutely everything through their social media apps. So there's concern that in the next 3 years, what's going to happen then?
That's Kerry Allen from BBC Monitoring.